Bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, c'est vendredi le 15 septembre. Today is another little lighter day, so if you missed anything mercredi when there were a bunch of things on the agenda or any other time this week, this is the time to go back and do them because I'll be putting the grades for this week in on Monday. So if you don't want to see zeros in the grade book, this is the time to do all that stuff from this week. Aujourd'hui, dans l'histoire, we do have a discussion for our Aujourd'hui dans l'histoire, or This Day in History slide, which we'll get to momentarily. I'd also like to listen to La Chanson with those numbers. That's a really good song to get in your head because it will help you to learn the numbers, especially the double-digit ones. You know, those can be a little bit tricky. TPR, continue to be practicing with that with my video. If you did not do the flip video on Wednesday, mercredi, then this is the time to do that. And then I'd also like you to complete the weekly check-in so I can just kind of see how you're doing and if there's any way I can be supporting you better. Okay, aujourd'hui, c'est vendredi le 15 septembre. En 1635, la Martinique est devenue française. La Martinique est une île, an island, dans la mer des Caraïbes, in the Caribbean Sea, la mer des Caraïbes. You've heard of lots of Caribbean islands, I'm sure. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, Jamaica, etc. This is one you may not have heard of. It's fairly small, and it is actually part of France. So the same way that Puerto Rico is another good example, is a territory of the U.S. It's part of the U.S., but it's not an actual state. It has many of the same rights and responsibilities, I guess, as the states of the U.S., but in some ways it's different, and there aren't as many rights and responsibilities. So anyway, all of this to say that it's part of France. La Martinique is part of France, but it's a territory, and it's not actually located in Europe like the when you think of France, what that is. La Martinique est une île, we already went over that, an island. Dans le passé, deux peuples indigènes habitaient à la Martinique. So there were two indigenous peoples living there, les Arawaks et les Indiens Caraïbes. Quand Christophe Colomb est arrivé en 1502, as many of you know, Christopher Columbus is responsible for finding a lot of these islands in the Caribbean, as well as many places that are now part of North America. En 1502, that's when he arrived there. Oh boy, il a fait des actes de génocide contre les indigènes. As we know, a lot of the explorers of this era were guilty of taking out entire populations of indigenous peoples, and this was no exception. Il a fait des actes de génocide contre les indigènes, against the indigenous peoples. La Martinique became une colonie française pendant la période de l'esclavage. So when slavery was still legal up until the mid-1800s, around the time that slavery was made illegal in the U.S. La Martinique est devenue une colonie française. So the French colonized Martinique and used it, of course, as a lot of these places were used, to enslave the people who lived there and kind of exploit their natural resources. En 2010, les Martiniquais ont refusé l'indépendance. Donc, la Martinique fait partie de la France aujourd'hui. So we skipped a big period of history here. So yes, Martinique was a colony. Yes, slavery went on there. But, oh gosh, I'm not quite sure when. In the mid-19th century, and slavery was abolished way before then, but in the mid-19th century, mid-20th century, mid-1900s, a lot of the places that were formerly colonies of France became either independent nations or became territories of France. So they became, instead of just having like the colonizer and the place that, was kind of lower on the hierarchy, a lot of these places became territories. So they became more a part of the country as opposed to the inferior to the country, if that makes sense. So it is still part of France. It is no longer a colony. Now it is a territory. So lots more rights and responsibilities, like I mentioned before, I guess. So it is officially part of France. And then, so this was all leading up to this last point. En 2010, so in the recent past, les Martiniquais ont refusé l'indépendance. So they were given the chance to become independent, and they voted against it. They voted to stay part of France. Donc, la Martinique fait partie, is still part of de la France aujourd'hui, even today. So, interesting history and a beautiful, beautiful place. So that's a little bit about La Martinique, and the importance of today for La Martinique is that it became a French colony en 1635. So in what body of water is La Martinique located? I mentioned that pretty early on. And then what do you think la période d'esclavage means? I talked about it for a minute, so hopefully you got that. Otherwise, you can always rewind and listen to me talk about it again. Okay, that is it for aujourd'hui. Remember, the weekly check-in can be located in Schoology in the weekly check-in button right here. Okay, that's it for today. Au revoir tout le monde. Bon weekend.